We have been mostly cashless now for a while, especially since the proliferation of online selling platforms like Amazon. The convenience of using some sort of credit card is a major technological facet of modern society. This has expanded recently because of the pandemic. There was the unfounded fear that exchanging cash physically could cause a spread of disease, and we saw a big move to contactless payment. In the US, many retailers now refuse to accept cash. In Scandinavia, they are already mostly cashless and you can't even buy products on the street with cash. In China, it is also a cashless society. Chinese people pay each other now using WeChat. I'm not suggesting by any means that we revert back to cash, since that is not doable anymore. Online commerce cannot support it. But what I want to examine today is the risk of financial surveillance in today's society and how the lack of a cash option really obliterates any chance of privacy. Occasionally, we need a non-trackable way of making payments. I've also studied other methods of payments, and we'll get into 7 possible ways to obscure our financial activity to some degree, assuming we cannot use cash. Let's talk about it. Stay right there. First, we need to understand the big picture. How is the financial system rigged to surveil our activities? This is a typical story I hear. A friend of mine visits Bevmo and buys a fairly unique drink, very uncommon. He goes home and goes to his Facebook account and immediately sees the ad for this unique drink. Obviously, he was very suspicious of this and discusses it with me. I have heard multiple stories like this, particularly in connection with Facebook. If you actually research the possibilities, you will see that the tracking methods used by platforms like Facebook are not entirely clear. I've read that Facebook uses MasterCard and Visa transaction data. But if you study this further, MasterCard and Visa are just the network providers. They don't actually know the identity of the credit card user. The credit card network providers identify transactions using tokenized identities, supposedly. But indirectly, there is a way to match transactions. So in spite of the promises of big financial firms, it is still possible to match transactions to people because of other metadata like timestamps and exact locations. Things tracked by your phone. It is also possible that third parties perform this matchup to reverse engineer our transactions and match them to identities. I unfortunately don't have access to the inner workings of this, but I can see the suspicious results that seem to suggest that someone can track purchases on credit cards and match them to each one of us. But I have a clear idea of some entities that have access, and you need to understand these real risks. When you use MasterCard Visa, your credit card or debit card transactions are actually tied to a bank. It is the bank that can actually see every single transaction and who you paid. This is the first opening to access this transaction data. Do banks share transaction data? If you search bank privacy policies, they will typically say they do not share this data, but with various exceptions made about data exchange in the course of normal business. But this is the part that most people do not understand. When you use Venmo, Stripe, or Wise as an example, you likely are not aware that you go through a middleware financial data aggregator app. In the case of the apps I just named, these use a middleware product called Plaid. There are many middleware products competing with Plaid. There's Finicity and InvestNet, Yodlee, to name a couple of popular ones. The way these middleware apps work, they connect popular apps to your bank or multiple banks. And the way they do this is pretty shocking actually. When you sign up with a Venmo, for example, you log into your bank. You think and you provide your username and password. This is not some OAuth tokenized method like when you log on to some app using a Google account. No, you actually provide your real username and real password, and it is stored by the middleware app which in this case is Plaid. So Plaid has direct access to your entire bank account with your username and password. It can read every single transaction. It can process transactions for you. It's pretty scary actually, since you've enabled access to Plaid to your bank and you likely don't know this. Let's analyze this now. So in the case of Plaid or Yodlee or Finicity, you have now expanded access to your financial data at the transaction level from your bank and now to the middleware apps. And this gets worse. MasterCard completed its purchase of Finicity for $825 million, meaning this gives MasterCard access to the data of Finicity, so now they too have access to transaction data. Visa announced plans to buy Plaid for $5.3 billion. However, the government blocked the sale, so this did not go through. Visa's intent, of course, was to access the Plaid data. Maybe they can negotiate access to Plaid data without needing a sale of Plaid. Amex bought the technology of the company Kabbage, which is also partially involved in financial data aggregation. On a side note, some of you will also wonder about credit reporting agencies. Equifax, Experian, and TransUnion possess data that affect our privacy in a big way, since they compute a credit rating for each of us, just like a social score. However, to make it clear, these credit reporting agencies only see aggregated data on your monthly statements to your credit card. They don't see the transactions themselves. So although they are a risk in revealing financial status, they are not necessarily a source of transaction detail. One other thing I need to make clear is that MasterCard, Visa, American Express, and others sell your transactional data. This is sold to companies that study our behavior, companies that aim to use data to manipulate our choices, like Palantir, for example. The claim is that this data is sold without personally identifiable information, which is supposedly the same claim with the sale of your location data through your phone. My point here is that there is a way to match identity with this data if you have other data in separate databases. I gave the example of location data versus credit card data. So assume that tracking at the transaction level can be done. Let's not forget that every online selling platform has a lot of data on purchases. Amazon, for example, probably can profile many of us based on what we buy from them. And most of you do not obscure your identity with Amazon, and of course, they know where you live because they ship to you constantly. Let's also remember that most purchases come with an email confirmation, email that is completely readable and purposely read by Google, for example. Just to summarize the big picture, everything we spend money on is recorded somewhere and someone can get to it. And the only time before where they cannot get to it is if we use cash. I remember how during the McCarthy era in the 1950s that the FBI used to track subscriptions to publications as a way to track those with communist or socialist leanings. During World War II, Japanese people in the US were placed in internment camps, and proof of support for Japan were evidenced also by subscriptions to Japanese magazines. The idea of tracking behavior using financial transactions is not new. In fact, the government uses financial tracking as a way to identify terrorists and support for terrorist groups. Today, you can be profiled quite extensively by your support and donations to political groups and online subscriptions, or even purchase of certain books on Amazon. The idea that this can be used to profile certain members of the population that can be labeled as domestic terrorists is no longer a far-fetched concept. In fact, the same is already done using your Google search today. This is something I've documented in other videos. But the financial side of things is a more solid commitment. Giving money is a clear vote, and there's no hiding it. In today's surveillance world, this vote is tracked and noted. This bothers me very seriously, and the move by young people and businesses to a contactless and cashless payment method with no alternative means there will be no way to make moves without surveillance if some money is involved. Some of these choices can be little things like having the ability to pay for a VPN subscription without identification, for example. Some people like this option, and this push to a completely cashless society means that future generations will have zero chance of preserving their privacy in some cases when they think it is necessary. You won't be able to quietly give money to a friend in need without a financial record. For example, a friend you don't want to be associated publicly with. A cashless society becomes a world of complete conformity. Your life is about following rules, and if you don't follow the rules, you commit a crime. Now let's make the threat profile clear and see if we can study some potential solutions offered and see what the pluses and minuses are for these. The threat is that your financial transaction data is visible to the banks completely. It is also visible to the financial aggregator middleware companies like Plaid, Finicity, Yodlee if you sign up with mobile apps that have bank access. Both of these threats include personally identifiable information like names, social security numbers, addresses, and so on. MasterCard, Visa, and American Express sell bulk data of transactions. Presumably, these do not have personal identifiers unless the data is matched to a Plaid or such a company. Now, American Express has access to all data at all times because it is both a bank and a card network. However, because it operates separately from a bank, it may isolate itself from the Plaid type of companies. So it's simply a question of how much of the Amex data is sold with personal IDs. They claim they do not do that. I'm going to use this general backgrounder of the threat to analyze some financial payment options aside from cash. Many of these options are not flawless, but I will give you information so you can assess them for yourself. Number 1, avoid mobile payments. One of the ways to prevent being included in the pool of people tracked by the data of Plaid, Finicity, Yodlee, and others is to not use mobile apps that log into your bank. Use only actual bank apps with the name of the bank on it. This obsession with alternate payment methods like mobile Venmo and even pushing Apple Pay just exposes the data to someone in the middle who will likely share this data. Again, most of the youth select options by convenience without really understanding privacy risks. Number 2, Privacycom. A company that claims to be privacy focused is the credit card provider Privacycom. The way this service works, you associate a standard credit card to Privacycom, and then Privacy.com gives you another credit card, virtual or physical, with a different number. The benefit is supposed to be a separation between your real credit card and the one you use, let's say with Amazon. This service is mostly pushed for protecting against merchants. From my understanding, you get a different card number, which you can lock to certain merchants, and you can also set limits, which prevents fraud. I'm not clear on how the merchants check things like name on the card, billing zip code, and the usual security checks done when purchasing online. From what I've read, the Privacy.com cards don't come with a name. So beyond protecting from merchants, for example, obscuring your identity with Amazon, is there a benefit from keeping your financial data detail away from financial data aggregators? Protection from merchants with identity theft is less of a concern to me than my personal privacy threat. This is something that Privacy.com can answer. If I have a MasterCard with Bank of America and I link it to a Privacy.com virtual credit card, and then I buy a book about three-letter agencies on Amazon, what detail is shown on the MasterCard with Bank of America? Is it just lumped as a payment to Privacy.com, or is the detail duplicated? Assuming the detail of the transaction is not duplicated, then this could be a good option, since the idea is to wipe out the detail of what you actually purchased that can be seen in the databases of Bank of America and Plaid and MasterCard Visa, which has access to it. However, since Privacy.com also uses MasterCard Visa, then MasterCard Visa will at the very least have a tokenized version of the transaction detail and could be matched to the transaction at Bank of America. So my initial impression is that this is not going to do the job. Number 3, BitPay. Another option in the USA is a debit card called BitPay. Now this is going to be interesting because BitPay is a Bitcoin-based debit card, but the way I'm going to describe its use is not actually going to capitalize on the properties of Bitcoin. It will simply be used as a way to obscure identity. Bitcoin purchase in the USA is very regulated and watched by the IRS, so we will not do any gamesmanship here. You go to Coinbase.com and you buy Bitcoin. You have to register with your full identity as required by KYC laws. You will show your driver's license information and so on. Let's say you buy $1,000 worth of Bitcoin. Then you immediately transfer that Bitcoin at the current value to a BitPay debit card. BitPay converts the Bitcoin immediately to US dollars, so this method does not have a risk with the price movements of BTC. In essence, it's a conversion of US dollars to BTC and back to US dollars, all happening in a short amount of time, like in a few minutes. Your BitPay debit card will now have approximately $1,000 worth of US dollars. Since it is a debit card, it is not reported to credit reporting agencies. Since you purchased and disposed of Bitcoin in minutes, there's no tax impact either with capital gains. The problem with this method is that BitPay is managed by Metropolitan Bank, and as such, it requires the exact same KYC rules as any other bank, your full identity, and I don't even know if you can alias your credit card. Now, since this is not attached to an actual bank account, there would be no instance where a Plaid, Yodlee, or Finicity would have access to data on this debit card. So that's a plus. BitPay claims they do not sell transaction data also. But to me, this is not a good solution unless you can alias the name on the BitPay credit card. Number 4, corporate separation. Another simple solution is to separate your personal information from your credit card, at least from the merchant's point of view. This can be done by having a corporate credit card. If you have a way of doing this, then the corporate credit card can be recorded at the merchant end without the name of the user sometimes. Depends on the bank. It also obscures your name from the transactional data at MasterCard Visa. Doing a corporate separation is quite a useful measure, for example, to keep personal information away from Amazon. It is simple to set up. However, it requires more accounting work unless such a corporation already exists, and setting up a new corporation on some states can be costly. External tracking still shows all the transactions though, although in theory it would be matched to a corporate name instead of a person's name. So this solution is not perfect either. Number 5, crypto. The reality is that today the only way to ensure a transaction tracking free method of payment is really via crypto. I'm not here to push to use crypto in a big way for investment or as the only method of payment. However, having the availability of a small amount of crypto at all times, like Bitcoin, is really useful for having the ability to do small transactions that are not easily tracked by Big Brother. No one will waste time tracking small crypto transactions, and crypto transactions do not have any transaction detail. There are also privacy-based crypto that have built-in anonymity like Monero, but they are not as well accepted and don't have the stability of value as Bitcoin. There's also an app called Incognito, which, through a technique of pooling crypto, is able to scrub the obvious trace of standard cryptos like Bitcoin. I made a video about that and you can check that out. In the absence of cash, crypto is probably the only way I know of today that comes close to maintaining some privacy. If you're afraid of price fluctuations, you can keep crypto in a US dollar type crypto like USDT or USDC and then convert to some other crypto when needed. The only problem with crypto is the level of merchant acceptance and the difficulty of buying and selling it. Number 6, money orders. The money order or cashier's check is a good way to separate transaction detail between the merchant and the buyer. It is inconvenient. In the US, the money order is purchased from the post office. You pay by debit card to the post office. The post office does not know what the money is for. so there is no record of the transaction detail, which provides some privacy. The money order does not directly connect a buyer to a merchant, since no identification is required at the merchant end. So this is still a good method of achieving some privacy. It is much easier than using crypto. Number 7, gift cards. Another method with less chances of acceptance is the gift card. You buy an Amazon gift card or some other retailer gift card and use it at that retailer. The problem is the limit on where it can be used. And frankly, the seller of the gift card can often also track how it was purchased if you use a credit card. The only certainty is to buy a gift card with cash, which, as I already said, is being removed as an option to force contactless payment. In the end, cash is still king. Cash has absolutely no identity. Cash is the perfect way to transact without a trace. I understand the government needs to limit cash because of the fears of money laundering and terrorism, but for the average person, it is a guarantee of some privacy. So to the young people pushing cashless transactions, be careful what you wish for, because when no one accepts cash anymore, you will suffer a loss that you cannot replace. My company provides tools to counter the threat to us and society. If more and more people use these tools, then we can blunt the effects of big tech's overreach. We have a VPN product, Bytes VPN, a metadata-free email, Brax Mail, and one of the new products is the Brax 2 Privacy Phone, which allows you to use the phone without an identity. These products are on my store on BraxMe. The link is in the description. I'm on the platform Odysee.com and Rumble.com. In case I get the platform, please follow me on those platforms using the links in the description. Thank you for watching and see you next time.